the On Garden Design podcast with Fleur and Sachi, where we chat about what makes a garden great and we try to inspire and make designing accessible to anyone who's interested in gardens, plants and chatting. Your hosts are long-time friends Fleur and Sachi, who bring a fresh perspective and their life experience to designing gardens as a second career. You can find us on Facebook and Insta. We'd love to have you subscribe so you know when the next episode is available. So, Sachi, here we are again. And before we throw ourselves into the next topic, what have you been doing?
Wow, I spent a fabulous weekend. It was a birthday weekend for my partner at Osborne House, which is in Bundanoon in the Southern Highlands, which for those that are not in the know is in New South Wales.
And is it a really classic kind of place or is it typical of that area?
Yeah, it is. So it's a fairly newly renovated place. It used to be a health springs type thing. No longer is. We ate way too much and drank way too much. So
healthy for your mind.
Yeah, it's healthy for healthy for relaxing, put it that way. And it's a beautiful old building. And I think it's even like 100 years old, something like that came to mind.
And for, of course, our UK listeners, that's probably a beautiful new building.
Right, exactly.
But for us in Australia, that's considered, right. That's really old.
Don't forget,
here.
We were colonised by, the English in only 1788. So old for us is 100 years. Yeah. But it was beautiful. And in fact, the thing that was most beautiful was the gardens. They were really spectacular.
Tell me about the gardens. I love to hear a good garden story.
Yeah, well, look, it's winter. So I was sort of expecting it all to look a bit drab. But no, the first thing you see when you drive up the driveway is these towering 10-metre rhododendrons in this, the crimson bright flowers. It was just spectacular, just amazing. So we spent a good 20 minutes. Thank God my partner's a photographer because I was just there in awe at the plant. He was just there in awe of the potential photos,
Yeah.
And trying to get me to model, which is just always a disaster. So but we spent a long time admiring the rhododendrons. But do
you drive through them, do you? Are they sort
drive
of hanging
under
over?
them. You drive under them. And then when you get out of the car and you kind of look back, you see these massive towering things because they are like trees. They're not even bushes anymore. They are trees.
And they're framing the entrance to the
gardens?
They
do, although it's within a sort of a wood. So there's a lot of other trees. But the garden itself is stunning and they've done a really nice job of they've got a lovely wrought iron gazebo which is painted in this sort of burgundy plummy colour, and then they've got some phormiums and some cordylines which have really spiky structures but exactly the same colour as the gazebo.
Oh, that's interesting because I know for you to highlight that is
I don't like them.
I know because I've never heard you say a positive thing about those particular spiky plants, cordylines and phormiums.
That's right.
But it's great because you obviously are saying it belonged.
Well,
it worked.
It worked. It wouldn't be something I would do, but in amongst the lush agapanthus and the green of the box hedges, and they had a Abelia grandiflora that was clipped as well. Then they had these spiky phormiums and cordylines that reflected that colour of that gazebo, and it worked really well in that respect, absolutely.
I love that. I love the use of colour and in the fact that it's a winter garden.
And there was absolutely no lack of things to look at as a result.
Sometimes I think some of the best gardens have these sort of bold injections of colour in the structures.
Yeah, that's
right. So to
right.
take a gazebo and to do something like make it like a plum kind of colour, pick up some of the foliage colour, it just adds that much extra beauty.
That's right.
And interest. And it also says that, you as the garden custodian, you've got a little bit of quirk about you. You're prepared to go out a little bit further.
That's right.
Yeah.
And in fact, the only other thing I just quickly mentioned, because then we should kick on to our subject, they had with the gazebo, and they had a fountain there as well. So it was in all sort of focal points, line of sight, leading you up to look out to a view.
I love that.
It was beautiful. But the fountain was really sweet too. It was a layered fountain, a bit like the one in your front garden, Flo. So it had, it was tiered. And then around the base of the bottom tier, in the actual fountain, it must have been made out of, I don't know, stone, composite, concrete, something. They actually had these little, I don't know how to describe it. They had the water irises were planted inside the stonework. It was like they'd created these holes so you could plant the irises actually into the fountain rather than in the water. So they weren't in the water, they were in the actual structure of the fountain. It was really, I'll put up a picture.
Love to see it.
Yeah.
And
so
also put a
Instagram.
picture of the rhododendron as well.
Yes, I will. Although it's so hard to capture it, in a picture and show its real sort of majesty
Yeah.
almost. But anyway.
But that's sort of great, because I think we're really, what you've just described then is not a typical Aussie backyard.
No, totally. So that's a great segue. I like it. Go for it. So what are we talking about today?
Right. Well, we are going to put this out there to our listeners today and say we are challenging you on the standard layouts of what we see in residential backyards, particularly in Australia. Look, I think these are kind of ubiquitous. You're going to find them across the world, these sort of shapes. And we're going to say that there are a lot of very ordinary backyards that are just nicely maintained with a nice lawn and a perimeter hedge, but we're going to suggest you can do better.
And I think the other thing to keep in mind is that you often go into gardening and you think, oh, I really want a garden that looks like this. And then you look at your backyard and you go, oh, it's the wrong shape for that, or I don't have the foundations that I need to do that. So we're going to say it doesn't matter what the shape of your garden is. There's ways that you can make your garden interesting no matter what. So let's dive in.
Let's dive in, absolutely. Yes, because there's lots of different tricks and tips, and we're going to talk about 4. So I might just mention the 4 different shapes we're going to talk about first. And then
scenarios,
Yeah, scenarios. Okay, the first one is you've got a shallow and wide garden. And we're talking about backyards here. So basically looking from your back steps, back veranda, porch, whatever you have. So shallow meaning maybe it's only kind of 5 metres, or maybe it's about a third of the width, what you've got there.
So it's significantly wider than it is deep from your back boundary, whatever that might be.
Yeah. Then we're going to talk about those narrow and long gardens, which, a lot of people have them, particularly apartments, terrace-style living.
Courtyards, often that shape.
Yep. And then the third one is really a square garden. A lot of people think that's a really good solution, but, that needs attention too.
Well, it's just so symmetrical and so bog standard, isn't it? How do you make it interesting?
Yeah, we want to give you some tips.
Yep.
And the last one is the irregular garden shape. And Canberra particularly, where we live, has a lot of curved roads, and so that creates really awkward shaped blocks. They're not just regular
And that's
blocks.
before they even put a randomly shaped house on it, where you have a weird corner or some bits that stick out from a well-intentioned renovation at some point.
Yes, and when you've got those sort of cul-de-sacs, you've got all these houses that have sort of points that all meet, a bit like when you cut a pie.
That's right.
Got all these meeting points. And so people have these awkward little pointy bits in their garden where the fence meets, and they're like, what can I do with that? So let's
kick off.
Let's kick off.
With the first one.
Yeah, and I think the first one, so we're talking about the really shallow garden where you're sort of looking straight at the fence, and it's got
space on either side.
Yep. So how do we address that? The first one I want to put out to you is, so we're challenging the Aussie backyard here. We're challenging the fact that it's just space with a hedge around the perimeter fence. So what I want to say to you is the counterintuitive nature of bringing the foliage forward. And when I say forward, bringing it close to the back of the house.
And why do you do that? What does it do?
Yeah. So what it does is it tricks the brain. And this is all about confounding the mind, because the foliage comes forward, your space actually feels larger. And what you're doing is, when I say foliage forward, so that could be vertical kind of interest where you're peering through branches of a small trees,
Yep.
Tall shrubs, something that's, maybe it's even structures that come forward like arbours. But the idea is that your brain has to see that, process that, and then look through it, and then be invited.
And only then it gets to the border.
That's it.
Yep.
Yeah. And so you've kind of, you're manipulating space to make it feel more interesting.
Well, and you're also tricking the eye, because you're creating that fraction of time before it has to get to the fence, which makes it perceive that things are further away than it really is. And so what would you do, though, for instance, to that fence to perhaps make it recede even further?
Yeah, the big trick in the book is making a fence dark colour, not a light colour, because it recedes. So we're looking now from our back porch straight out to the fence, and what I want you to do is I want to visually distort that direct line of sight to the back fence. So I'm going to do that by bringing the foliage forward. I'm going to bring structures forward. I'm going to put structures in the way so that you can't see directly to the fence. And then I'm going to have, where you can see the fence, there's going to be something of interest there, like a sculpture, like a garden bench.
Yeah, or even a little building. structure,
Yeah.
some sort in
Yeah.
that way.
Yeah, it could be like a little swing seat with an arbor over the top of it.
Yep. Water feature.
Water feature's a great one.
Yep.
Yeah, yeah.
So anything to stop the eye from falling straight onto the fence.
Yes.
That's what we're aiming for.
Yeah, so you're basically distorting that. But the other thing you can really do if you've got these short blocks is if you've got some borrowed landscape. So what are we talking about? That is, it means it's landscape that's not in your garden, but it's in the either neighbour's garden or beyond. Might be some big trees or something, and you want to maximise that. So you're really going to close and frame your view up. Maybe towards the back fence you put on something like a faux set of doors. It makes it
Or a mirror.
Mirror. It makes it look like you're passing through the fence to that borrowed landscape, and in a way your mind is then owning that space that you actually don't own.
That's a great idea. And I think it goes to this, you're tricking your head into thinking it doesn't end there.
Yes.
It keeps going somewhere else, or it's a bit further away.
Yeah.
Which is really what we're trying to do here.
Yeah.
So what do you do with the two spaces on either side?
Yeah, that's the fun space. So this is when you're, in your initial stage, you're thinking, what do I want? What are the functions I want in my garden? And there's no right or wrong answer to that. It's what you want in your garden, and that might be a playground. It might be a vegetable garden.
Entertaining area.
With a nice pergola over it. Neat reading nook. It could be where...
Place to park the kids where you can't see them.
Yes.
A fire pit.
Fire pit's a great one at the end of the garden. So the idea is you create avenues to go left and right. And those transitions towards those spaces, the destination is the functions. So what you want at each of the space. And that's where all the activity happens. So the idea is you want to be drawn into the garden and then to the left and the right.
Yeah.
And that takes away that emphasis on the...
What's immediately in front of you. Yeah. I've even seen, and there was quite a nice garden with this, sort of structural challenge of shallowness. They actually had, from the back of the house, because they had a deck or an entertaining area, they had not a path down the middle. They had paths on either side to access the thing in the middle that was behind the foliage that was right in front of the deck.
Love it.
Yeah. So playing with that theme of how do you bring something forward to make the rest feel further away and then not give you a direct path to the back boundary.
That's a great one. Yeah.
Yeah. And so tell me a bit about how you could use diagonals as well in this scenario.
Yeah, so what we want to do is we're tricking the eye and we're trying to confound the senses. It says we're not looking directly ahead. We want to look to the sides where the axis feels longer. Okay, stand in your backyard. So directly ahead is 90 degrees.
Yep.
Shift 45 degrees towards the left
One
boundary.
Of the corners, yep.
Or your right boundary.
Yeah.
Yep. And that 45 degrees then is you're looking directly at the front of the gazebo or that garden bed.
All right.
But to get to those diagonals, your path may zigzag around the edge of the diagonals. So you're actually changing views and it's extending your journey through the garden to get to those destinations.
And so you're saying you'd actually build a zigzaggy path that might take you to via other kind of garden beds?
Yes.
Yeah.
So some of those diamonds might actually be a planted out garden bed.
Yeah.
Some might be a veggie garden space and some might be a
hard area.
Paved hard area. And through the middle of those diamonds, sometimes you can transition. So you might have a little informal stepper path that takes you through the middle of that garden, or you might, with a veggie garden, you have parterre arrangement. You can walk through the centre of the diamond. But your main path would go around the diamonds.
Yeah, right.
And so it's extending the journey. It's just making your garden more interesting, and it's also challenging the rectilinear shape.
Yeah, and you're getting onto that long, I guess the longest line in your garden, which is that diagonal, and that's what you're using to do all of that. I reckon we've done this one to death.
Yeah.
Let's keep moving. We've got plenty of other scenarios to look at.
So the next one we want to look at is the narrow and long.
In good Australian colloquial terms, that's the skinny and long garden.
So like your skinny latte.
Yeah, that's what skinny jeans.
Oh, yeah, skinny and long, yeah.
That means basically these are the ones where you've got often particularly in places like Sydney, you get these very long, skinny backyards from terrace houses. The courtyards that you often get with apartments are skinny and long, as we mentioned in the beginning. So you're quite confined in that you might have 3 metres to play with in width. You might be lucky and you have 2. But then you might have, 9 metres of depth.
Yeah, these are probably one of the most limiting garden layouts, I think. and
Challenging.
And the best thing you can have, or to build into this sort of garden layout, is levels.
Yes.
So this idea of going down a few steps, having an open space, part of it on one side has a garden bed, the other part is a functional space. And then you go up another level and that whole arrangement flips.
Yes.
So the idea is from the back of your porch, you're seeing small spaces, but you can see this thread where you're being led along
to the end.
Yeah.
And I actually was looking at one of these gardens as well, and they had the sort of the space furthest away slightly raised, which was also a really nice way of it brought it a bit closer because it wasn't, at the same level as the ground. But I think the other thing in these spaces is that you're often quite limited with the space you have as well. So if you are going to put lots of levels in, you want to use them cleverly. And so things like the edges of your garden beds might become your seating, for instance.
Yes.
Or, you might build something into your wall or whatever it is that your boundaries have, and incorporate that as part of your garden as well. So this is where climbers and vertical gardens can really come into their own as well in these spaces, because they are so narrow. You don't want to take more width away than you need to.
Yeah, they can be tricky. But one of the thing also that can be very effective in these sort of garden arrangements is pushing your outdoor sitting space the furthest from the house. Because
That's not so practical for carrying food out there.
Well,
depending how long it is.
Because a lot of people put their big furniture right next to the house, and then you've got to look through your furniture to see the garden, whereas it's much better to look through the garden to see your furniture.
Yes, that's true.
So I'm sort of challenging to say, be careful not to put too much heavy stuff right close to the house. Push it out.
Yep.
And make it a destination so that you're drawn out to the garden. And use colour. Use something that the eye just goes,
straight to.
I want to go. I want to see that. I can just get a glimpse of something colourful out there. I can't quite see it. I need to go and see it.
Yes. So that creating that sense of mystery and intrigue.
And once again, water. Use of moving water and reflecting water, like reflecting ponds and mirrors.
Yes.
They're just the best things
in these kind of gardens in particular. Yeah. And so what do you think about, there's some texts say, don't just have that single narrow path. It emphasises, that there is just a depth to the garden, and you are, you're basically drawing the line saying, here it is. What's your view on that? What can you do about it? How do you manage that otherwise?
Yeah, I think, these sort of gardens like we're talking about now, which is the long, thin, skinny, you can't do wibbly-wobbly lines. They have to still be in block structure because they're usually kind of, maybe you look at these rooms of 3 by 3 metres, and they've got to be a series of those. But the path then changes angles. So it's 90-degree changes on the angle.
Yeah.
There's no wibbly-wobbly curves in these kind of gardens. There's just not enough space for that. So you want to...
every inch
The garden's working really hard. And the other thing is, another counterintuitive one I want to throw out there is the fewer plants and the bigger the plant. So if you've got a nice big tree and the fewer pots you have, the more spacious your garden's going to feel.
So simplicity.
Yeah.
And I think with the simplicity, it goes also to your surfaces. You don't want too many different surfaces. Think about how you're blending all of what you've got, again, because that refines your simplicity. It means you don't have lots of different things that will create that sense of chaos and clutter and a confusion almost.
Yeah.
Is there anything else key that we need to mention for this one?
No, I think what I'd like to do is move into the square space.
That's
because
square space.
The square gardens, because they actually present a lot of opportunity, I think. And I think the first thing you've got to do is you've got to chunk them into the functional spaces because they give you plenty of. If you think of a kind of like a checkerboard, and you take how big your garden is, you might get kind of
you might
6
get 4
squares.
Or you might get 6.
Yep. And that's sort of, well, if we're talking square, you probably get 4 because you can't get 6, can you, in a square garden?
No, that is true. Just shows how good we are at maths.
That's right. So it probably has to be 4, or then it has to be a multiple of. Yeah, that's right.
It's 8
or 9. No, it can't be 8.
Oh, no, it can't be 8.
No, it's got to be square root stuff.
I'm embarrassed.
So, yes, we're working on 4 or 9 right now. But then again, it can mean that you could go 8 because two of those 9 might become one.
That's what I was about to say. They don't have to be square in themselves.
That's right.
Yeah.
They can just be, it's a part of dividing up space to keep proportion and scale.
So you want to keep balance in this shape.
Yeah,
because it's a
absolutely.
very symmetric shape. So balance is an important element here too.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean it needs to be symmetric though.
No. And I think this is where, in a squarish type of garden, this is where you can introduce curves.
Yes.
I think this works really well because it distorts the squareness and it
brings a softness to those harsh corners.
It softens it. That's right. And you can really fill those corner areas with, a lot of plant life and really bring it away from the boundaries. Another thing that can work really well in a square garden is you actually create your perimeter walkway, so your paved space along the outer area, like around where the fence is. And you have your garden beds and your lushness in the centre.
In the centre. That's an interesting idea, because the other thing is then you also don't want to be thinking, again, of it all on one level. You want to introduce some height to create some of that. And that can be then, you need to balance it, as we were talking about as well, but to break those spaces up and perhaps in the middle of your square garden you do have some height.
Yeah, well, I saw a really good picture the other day which had, I'll try and describe this. So the boundary fence is there, and then from the boundary fence comes the path. It's just a small little garden bed near it, but low. And then, so it's just a small path. And then inside from the path is a row of pleached trees. So what we mean by that is kind of like flat paddle
Not
pop.
Pleached with a P.
There was nothing white about them. They were definitely green. They weren't bleached. They were pleached. And the idea is they're kind of like paddle pops. I'm not saying lollipops because they're not round. They're paddle pops. They're flat and they all join together, right?
So for those people who don't live in Australia and don't eat paddle pops, we're talking about an ice cream shape. Yeah, we're talking about an ice cream.
A flat ice cream.
A flat, exactly, that's rounded on one end and flat on the bottom.
And the idea is that these all join together, so they're kind of hedged, but they're vertically elevated. So what you're seeing at your sort of eye height and below is just the trunk.
Just the trunk, yeah.
And then from the eye height and above, maybe up another metre, is the foliage of the tree. And they're kind of hedged together, but they create this visual separation between the fence and the tree, and the path goes around the outside. So it's
interesting.
It was just such a clever effect. And I thought, you've got to be brave and bold to do this, because it's counterintuitive, but it's very visually effective.
Yeah, but also even knowing what kind of tree to use to have that kind of a proportion on a tree is interesting.
Yeah. The hornbeam's obviously a good one, but there's plenty of other ones out there.
Interesting. So I think the square garden, the world's your oyster, because it is a very, I guess, manipulable, is that a word, shape? I don't even know if it's a word, but you know what I'm trying to get at.
I do know.
Let's get on to our next last one.
Yep. Irregular shapes.
Irregular shapes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So irregular shapes, I actually find them quite exciting as a designer because it gives me a lot of opportunity. And the first thing I start with an irregular shape is to say to the client, what do you want to put in your garden?
So the functions.
Yeah. So once we sort out the functions, then it's almost like taking a series of little building blocks and arranging them so that there's an entire journey that encompasses all these awkward spaces. And when you think of the end of the garden, that pointy apex or that weird fence joining, they're often great spaces to put in a keyhole-shaped fire pit. So you actually do your seating in a keyhole shape, like a raised stone sort of sitting area that's curved.
Where does the apex go?
The apex is at the end, and then you can just put plants around that.
Oh, right.
So, but it sort of softens the whole idea that the whole garden goes to a point,
yeah.
Because you've got this curve wall right in front of you. And
so you can use geometric and curves in these spaces, obviously.
Yeah, you really can. Yeah. And
they lend themselves to either.
Yeah, and really, probably the most important thing about any of this is when you first look at the site and you've got to work out, where's the north point.
Yeah, that
so
is critical. That's for Australia. North is important. For Northern Hemisphere, it's south.
Well, you'd want to know your north point in the Northern Hemisphere so that you orientate your garden to the south.
Yes, that's right. That is true.
You've still got to know your north point.
Well, yeah.
I don't know, if you're a designer in the Northern Hemisphere, do you talk about a south point?
Who knows?
I don't think you do. I think you work out of North Point and you
I don't know,
orientate
because
your
they
garden
do talk
accordingly.
about south facing as opposed to us who talk about north facing.
Yeah, but south facing
is different too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway,
Yeah.
moving on.
Yeah. The idea of this irregular shapes is that you can play with manipulating the space really well, and you can fill awkward spaces with things like, I said, a fire pit's a great one at the end of a garden journey. You could fill that space with something that doesn't need to be regular, like an orchard. You could put a microforest in there.
You could.
Another thing that would be fantastic is a nature play space for kids. But really, I think irregular garden shapes provide a lot of opportunity because you can be more free-flowing, you can use your curves, you can use a series of circles that break up the strange angles of the garden.
You can play on the strange angles and create more strange angles as part of your interest in your garden.
And I reckon that the sort of key thing with that one is be bold. If you're going to if you've got an irregular shaped garden, just be unashamedly bold about it. Pick the shape that you want to have and do it and repeat it.
I think that's
and
excellent
that repetition, it validates that.
What's there.
That's it. You've got to be bold. And things like curves, you've got to have bold curves, not piddly little wiggles. It's got to be strong. It's got to say, I intentionally did that.
And it's also, I guess, it's the garden zone where you can really pick. So I've got, quite blocky geometric shapes in my garden. You can put curves in potentially much more easily in this kind of garden than you can, say, in a narrow lawn garden where it's a lot harder to make curves work because you do have that opportunity to play with unusual spaces.
Yeah. So that's quite fun.
It is. And so I think we've done our 4 scenarios. What are the takeaways for you out of this?
Yeah. Look, key takeaways. Gardens are spaces to manipulate, and the better gardens have the best manipulation of space. So
you're a manipulator from way back.
Well, it kind of plays back into my career as an intelligence officer. I'm all about manipulating people's mindsets and influencing them, making them see what I see. So
now you can see why she's coming to podcasting, can't you?
But I think maybe this plays on that, but one of the things you have to achieve in these layouts is you've got to try and confound your senses in the space because it's compelling, and spatial anomaly really confounds the brain and says, right, it's not what I thought it was going to be, and it's so much more exciting.
Yes, that's a great point. And I think the things for me that really sort of resonate, they are pretty much the same for each of the garden shapes. Thinking very clearly about what you want in your garden and then zoning it to reflect those things.
Well, I think we should wrap up there. And if you want to come and see an example of, particularly, I've got a square garden and...
lucky you.
Yes, it's quite a square shape. And so one way I've really manipulated that, come and see, I'm doing garden tours in late October, November. So if you're Canberra-based or nearby, have a look on my various social medias and you'll see the links for that.
So Gardens with Fleur, and also Eventbrite will be where you can buy the tickets for those.
That's right, yeah.
And I think they will be fantastic events. Fleur's very practiced in this, so definitely worth going to.
Full of
if
tips
anyone's
and tricks.
Interested. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
You can talk to the woman herself.
That's right.
It's been great chatting today. We'd love a follow on our podcast. You can find us on Instagram or on Facebook, and we'll talk to you next time. See you later.
Then.